There are some countries that just don't make sense being this bad at football. On the one hand, you've got countries like Uruguay, 3 million people, and they somehow keep producing players like Federico Valverde, Luis Suarez, Ronald Araujo. On the other, you've got China and India, each with more than 1.5 billion people, and they can't put together 11 guys who can actually play. What explains that? So here it is, 7 countries that should be a whole lot better at football than they actually are. If you enjoy football content like this, feel free to subscribe and leave a like. And we're going to start with the one that's hardest to explain, because this country actually produces great players, plenty of them, and it still falls short of what it should be. Colombia. 52 million people, a national obsession with the game. And in the last decade alone, they've sent Luis Diaz to Liverpool, James Rodriguez to Real Madrid, Radamel Falcao to Atletico and Manchester United, Juan Cuadrado to Juventus. The talent has always been real, so why does it feel like Colombia is always, almost? Well, Colombian football didn't really exist on the world stage until the 1980s. Before that, it was a regional curiosity. Then came the golden generation, Carlos Valderrama, Faustino Asprilla, René Higuita with that scorpion kick at Wembley, and for one shining moment, Colombia looked like a serious threat. Then it disappeared. For nearly a decade, nothing. Then James in 2014 brought them back, the quarterfinal against Brazil, the goal of the tournament. And then, up, down, up, down. Look at Croatia. 4 million people, about 1/13 the size of Colombia. Croatia has been to a World Cup final, 2 World Cup semifinals. Look at Uruguay, 3 million people. World Cup semifinal in 2010, Copa America in 2011. Portugal, 10 million. Euro champions in 2016. And Colombia won Copa America title all the way back in 2001. A Copa America final in 2024 lost to Argentina 1-0. And a single World Cup quarterfinal in their entire history. When my family in Brazil talks about South American football, Colombia comes up in this very specific way. They could be better. They could be Argentina. The players are there, but is always there. Well, the truth is Colombian football has always had the raw material. What it doesn't have is the conveyor belt. The system that takes a Croatian kid from a small town and turns him into Luka Modric by the time he's 20. In Colombia, talent shows up in waves. Sometimes you get a generation. Sometimes you get a drought. No country with 52 million people and that level of passion should be running on luck. But at least Colombia keeps producing players. The next country has been throwing money at football for 30 years, and somehow getting less and less out of it. Turkey. Roughly 85 million people. Stadiums that feel like volcanoes. The Galatasaray-Fenerbahce Derby. The famous Welcome to Hell banner for Manchester United back in 1993. If pure passion built football powers, Turkey would have won 3 World Cups by now. Instead, between 2002 and 2022, Turkey didn't reach a single World Cup. They've now scraped back in for the 2026 World Cup, beating Kosovo 1-0 in a playoff final at the end of March. A country of 85 million people, with one of the most passionate football cultures on earth, needing a last-gasp playoff win to barely qualify. That tells you exactly where Turkish football actually sits right now. And Turkey was good in 2002. Genuinely good. They finished 3rd at the World Cup in Korea and Japan, and Hakan Şükür scored after 11 seconds against South Korea in the 3rd-place match. Still the fastest goal in World Cup history. They had Rüstü in goal, Emre and Tugay running the midfield, Hasan Sass on the wing. 6 years later, Euro 2008, they reached the semifinal. Lost to Germany 3-2 in one of the great Euro games ever played, and it just stopped. Turkey went from 2008 all the way to 2021 without playing in a major tournament. They only came back in 2021. So what happened? Look at how Turkish clubs operate. Galatasaray, Fenerbahce, Besiktas, they spend big. But they spend on veterans. They sign aging European stars to fill stadiums and sell shirts. Osimhen at Galatasaray. In the last years, Mesut Özil at Fenerbahce. Robin van Persie, Wesley Sneijder, Didier Drogba. The list is enormous. And every contract handed to a 33-year-old import is a youth slot that doesn't exist for some Turkish 18-year-old. Then there's the youth structure. Turkish academies have historically valued size and physicality over technical development. Big, strong kids get pushed through. Small, clever kids get cut. That's not how you build a Modric. That's not how you build a Pirlo. Here's a comparison that should sting. Croatia, 4 million people, more than 20 times smaller than Turkey, has played in 4 of the last 5 World Cups. They made a final in 2018, a semifinal in 2022. Turkey has played in none of them. That's a system that isn't producing what it should be producing. Arda Güler and Yildiz are a breath of fresh air, and maybe a sign that something is changing in Turkey's youth development. The country seems to be starting to value talented young players more, instead of focusing almost entirely on physical strength. We'll see if that actually carries over to the Turkish national team. Well, and now we'll go to a country that's been ruling its entire continent for 30 years, and somehow still can't make it out of the round of 16 at a World Cup. Mexico. 130 million people. Football isn't a sport in Mexico, it's a national religion. The Mexican League pulls some of the biggest crowds in the world. They've got 8 million registered players. They produced Hugo Sanchez, one of the greatest strikers of the 80s. They dominate CONCACAF like nobody else, Gold Cup after Gold Cup, qualifying campaign after qualifying campaign. And yet, Mexico has not reached a World Cup quarterfinal since 1986. That's 38 years. The last time Mexico got past the round of 16, you could still buy a brand new Walkman. From 1994 to 2018, Mexico went to 7 consecutive World Cups. They got knocked out in the round of 16 every single time. 7 in a row. Mexican fans gave it a name, El Quinto Partido, the 5th game, the quarterfinal that never arrives. It's not a joke in Mexico. It's a national heartbreak that gets passed down like a family heirloom. Then 2022 came along, and Mexico, for the first time since 1978, didn't even make it out of the group stage. Knocked out on goal difference behind Poland. So how does a country this obsessed with football end up stuck at the same wall for 40 years? Look at how the Mexican League works. Liga MX doesn't have proper relegation anymore. It was suspended a few years back. No relegation means no urgency. No urgency means clubs get comfortable. Comfortable clubs stop developing young players, because why bother? You're never going down anyway. So they fill the roster with foreign veterans instead. Argentines, Brazilians, Colombians. The squad spots that should belong to 20-year-old Mexicans go to 30-year-old imports. And then there's the access problem. A lot of Mexican youth academies are pay to play. You want your kid in the system, you better be able to afford it. Which, in a country with massive inequality, means a huge chunk of potential talent never even gets a look. The next Hugo Sanchez might be working a regular job in Oaxaca right now. Nobody will ever find out. I grew up watching the US-Mexico rivalry obsessively. In California, El Tri was the football team for a huge chunk of the population. The Azteca games on Univision, the qualifiers, the noise, the colors. Mexico has every ingredient. The passion, the population, the league, the players, the money. And somehow, every 4 years, it stops at the exact same door. The next country also had a passionate football scene. Half a century ago, they were European champions. Today, you'd struggle to name 3 of their players. And Lev Yashin, the only goalkeeper to ever win the Ballon d'Or, was Soviet. The Black Spider himself. Russia. 145 million people. The biggest country on Earth by landmass. A football nation with deep, deep roots. Most people forget this, but the Soviet Union was a footballing power. Genuine, serious power. They won the very first European Championship in 1960. They finished as runners-up at the Euros 3 more times, 64, 72, and 88. They reached the semifinal of the World Cup in 1966. And Lev Yashin, the only goalkeeper to ever win the Ballon d'Or, was Soviet. When the USSR broke apart in 1991, Russian football collapsed with it. Economic chaos, mafia involvement in the clubs, half the talent gone overnight to newly independent countries. But then the oligarchs arrived. Roman Abramovich, Gazprom, Suleiman Karimov. Russian football got rich again. And for a while in the 2000s, it looked like the comeback was on. CSKA Moscow won the UEFA Cup in 2005, the first Russian club ever to win a major European trophy. Zenit St. Petersburg did the same in 2008, with Andriy Arshavin running the show. That same summer at Euro 2008, Russia made the semifinal, beat the Netherlands 3-1 in the quarterfinal. Arshavin became the talk of European football. And then, not much. Here's the strangest part. Russia has the money, the population, a historic football culture going back decades. And yet no Russian club has ever reached a Champions League semifinal. Not Spartak, not CSKA, not Zenit, ever. You know why? Because the best Russian players almost never leave. The Russian league pays them too much. Arshavin briefly went to Arsenal. Pavlyuchenko had a stretch at Tottenham. A few others. But the standard pattern is, best player in Russia gets offered a Champions League move, stays for a bigger paycheck at Zenit or CSKA. Compare that to Croatia, Serbia, Ukraine, countries that export their best talent and get stronger because of it. Russia hoards, and hoarding makes you stagnant. The home World Cup in 2018 was supposed to change things. And in fairness, it was a beautiful tournament. Russia reached the quarterfinal, beat Spain on penalties, eliminated by Croatia after another shootout. Stadiums full. The country fell in love with football for a summer, and then 2022 happened. The invasion of Ukraine. FIFA and UEFA banned Russia from everything. The national team frozen. Russian clubs frozen out of European football. Whatever momentum that 2018 run created, gone overnight. Right now, Russian football exists in a kind of suspended animation. They play friendlies against Iran and Belarus. The domestic league rolls on, but quietly. Their international future is a question mark with no obvious answer. But even without the ban, Russia was already drifting. The ban just made it impossible to ignore. And from a country that's been locked out of world football entirely, we go to the country that's about to host the biggest World Cup ever played. A country that, on paper, should have been a footballing superpower decades ago. The United States. 340 million people, the largest economy on the planet, a country that can build pretty much anything it decides to build, and yet, for most of the last 100 years, has been one of the worst football nations among the major world powers. The math, on the face of it, doesn't add up. Next month, the United States is going to co-host the biggest World Cup ever played. 48 teams, 16 host cities across North America, most of the matches on U.S. soil. The American men's national team will walk out as hosts in front of a fan base that, until very recently, treated football roughly the way the rest of the world treats curling. Just kidding. Actually, it's a huge myth that Americans don't care about football. And yeah, I mean the global football. I'm American, and I love it. The sport is growing like crazy over here. The point is, over here, people treat soccer as just another sport, not like a religion, the way it is in most of Europe, Latin America, Africa, and a big part of Asia. So, the question is, how does a country of 340 million people, many of them descended from countries where football is a religion, produce until the last decade or so almost no genuinely world-class players? It comes down to three things: culture, structure, and money. Start with culture. The US built its sports identity in the late 1900s around games it invented or significantly reshaped. American football, basketball, baseball, ice hockey came in from Canada. By the time football arrived in any serious form, all the slots were taken. The best young athlete in the United States didn't grow up dreaming of being Ronaldo. He grew up wanting to be Michael Jordan or LeBron James or Tom Brady or Mike Trout. That kid was lost to football before he ever kicked a ball. Anyone who's been around American schools knows this. By middle school, the football-playing kid in any American suburb either got pulled into American football and basketball, or was the slightly odd one whose parents were from somewhere else. Now the structure problem. The North American Soccer League, the NASL, tried in the 1970s, brought Pele to the New York Cosmos, Beckenbauer and Cruyff. Crowds were huge for a while. Total collapse by 1984, then nothing for over a decade. Major League Soccer didn't kick off until 1996. Compare that to England, where the Football League has run continuously since 1888. The United States started its top professional soccer division more than 100 years late. And the money problem. The famous American pay-to-play system. To get on a competitive youth team in the US, the family typically has to write checks. Big checks. Thousands of dollars a year, travel teams, club dues, private coaches, hotel weekends. The result is exactly what you'd expect. The kids playing organized soccer in America are disproportionately from middle-class and wealthy families. Meanwhile, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Spain, the kid who becomes the next superstar is usually the one who grew up with nothing but a ball and a wall. The American system has been quietly filtering out, for decades, the exact profile of kid who tends to become a world-class footballer. Now, none of this is permanent. American soccer is changing fast. MLS has grown from just 10 clubs at the beginning to 30 today. Messi moved to Inter Miami in 2023 and put American club soccer on global television almost overnight. Christian Pulisic is at Milan. Weston McKennie is at Juventus. Tyler Adams, Chris Richards, and Antonee Robinson are playing in the Premier League. Malik Tillman is at Leverkusen. 20 years ago, the US had maybe 2 players in Europe's top 5 leagues. Today, it's a real group. The hosting of 2026 is going to accelerate everything. More money, more attention, more kids signing up at 5 years old instead of 15. The real question isn't whether the United States will produce good footballers. They already do. The question is whether they can start producing great ones. Because the next mountain, superstar level, is the one America has never quite climbed. If you've made it this far with me, do me a favor, hit subscribe and stick around. This channel is all about international football, World Cups, and the stories most people miss. Real talk, if you're still here, you're the kind of football fan who watches Group H qualifiers between 2 teams nobody else cares about. You stay up for African Cup of Nations matches. You can name 3 players from Cape Verde. The next 2 countries on this list are made for people like us. Because if Mexico and Russia are mysteries, China and India are something closer to absurd. China. 1,400,000,000 people. The second largest economy on Earth. A country with state ambitions for football the size of small nations. And a senior national team that, on the global stage, sits somewhere between irrelevant and outright embarrassing. China has been to exactly 1 World Cup. 2002. They lost all 3 games, scored 0 goals, conceded 9. That's the entire World Cup history of the most populous country on Earth. And yet, for a stretch in the mid-2010s, China genuinely tried to muscle its way into world football, by any means necessary. In 2015, Xi Jinping, the literal president of China and a serious football fan, announced a national football plan. The country was going to qualify for host and eventually win a World Cup. State-backed money flooded into the Chinese Super League. Hulk arrived at Shanghai SIPG for around $60 million. Oscar came from Chelsea for around $60 million more. Carlos Tevez joined Shanghai Shenhua on a contract reported to make him the highest-paid footballer in the world, over $40 million a year. The Chinese Super League was briefly, on paper, the highest-spending league on the planet, and none of it worked. The Chinese national team didn't get better. The local players didn't develop. The whole exercise was just paying foreign veterans to play for Chinese fans while the Chinese youth pipeline stayed empty. By 2017, Beijing slapped huge taxes on foreign signings. Then COVID arrived. Then the state companies pulled their funding. And then came one of the strangest stories in modern football, Jiangsu Suning, 2020 Chinese Super League champions. The day they lifted the trophy, they were the kings of Chinese football. Less than 4 months later, the club shut down. Just ceased to exist. Champions of China dissolved before they could even defend the title. The richest league on earth couldn't keep its own title-winning club alive. The national team has slipped even further since then. China even lost 7-0 to Japan in World Cup qualifying. And once again, the Chinese national team was eliminated and failed to qualify for the 2026 World Cup. China tried to buy a football identity. You can't buy that. You have to grow it. From kids playing in parks, on streets, in cracked concrete schoolyards. And until that exists in China at a national level, all the billions in the world will keep producing exactly what they've produced so far, which is nothing. But at least China has qualified for 1 World Cup. The next country has, in the entire history of the sport, never actually played in one. And it has the population of an entire continent. India. 1,420,000,000 people. Officially the most populous country on Earth, having quietly overtaken China a couple of years ago. A country where cricket is the first religion, sure, but where football is genuinely the second most popular sport. Around 68 million Indians actively follow football. That's roughly the entire population of the United Kingdom. And in 1950, India was actually supposed to play at the World Cup in Brazil. They had qualified. Most of their Asian competitors had withdrawn, so India was through by default, but they were in. Then India pulled out before the tournament even started. Various reasons: cost, lack of preparation time, the famous old myth that FIFA refused to let them play barefoot. India has never qualified for a World Cup since, and it's not for lack of fans showing up. In 2017, India hosted the FIFA Under-17 World Cup. Total attendance across the tournament, 1,347,133. That's an Under-17 World Cup attendance record. It beat the previous record set in China in 1985. It beat Colombia 2011. Indian fans showed up for a youth tournament in numbers nobody else has ever matched at that level. So how is the senior national team this week? Several reasons, and none of them are about passion. The Indian Football Federation has a long, well-documented history of corruption and mismanagement. The professional league only started in 1996. For years afterwards, the Indian league system was a mess. There were two competing top divisions, the I-League and the Indian Super League, both claiming to be the country's top tier. Players didn't know which one mattered. The investment was split. Television rights were split. Sponsors were confused. The structure that takes a talented 15-year-old in India and turns him into a professional footballer at 22 simply hasn't existed for most of the country's modern football history. Here's the comparison that should sting. Uruguay, 3 million people, has played in 14 World Cups and won 2 of them. India, 1,420,000,000 people, has played in 0 World Cups and won 0 of them. Uruguay produces a Suarez once a generation, almost by reflex. India produces one Chetri, and then nothing behind him. This is the most absurd entry on this entire list. Not because Indian football lacks fans or money or passion, but because, with a population larger than every country in Europe combined, India should have produced a generation of good players by accident, statistically speaking. And it never has. So that is it. Colombia, Turkey, Mexico, Russia, the United States, China, India. Football doesn't care how many people you have. Football doesn't care how much money you have. Football cares about whether the talented 13-year-old in a small town has a path. Some of these countries will figure it out. The United States is the most likely candidate over the next 20 years. India is starting to invest seriously for the first time in its history. China keeps trying even when it probably shouldn't. Russia is in suspended animation, but that won't last forever. Maybe the next 50 years of football are going to look very different from this one. The question is which one of these 7 cracks the code first. So do you agree with my list, or do you see it completely differently? Drop your take in the comments. I read everything. If this one hit, share it with 5 mates who'd argue about it. And if you want more like this, there's another video on the channel about international football.